Welcome to episode 2 of Exposing Deportation Stories from TikTok. I hope you enjoyed episode 1, and we're gonna dive right into episode 2 with one of social media's favorite TikToker, Candace, aka La Güerita 70, who has been known to be a very prominent figure in this deportation niche. In fact, she has actually become the face of deportation by sharing her husband's story and her family's across several social media platforms, along with being featured on hundreds of local and international news stations highlighting their story. What if I told you that the story we were originally sold and the story that was sold to several news networks was actually not the full story? I'm going to take you on a deep dive of Candace's story through public records, her social media posts, and some of those same news articles that have been published and are currently linked to her page.
Kearns woman already charged with forging checks. Trucking company is now facing charges that she illegally billed customers of another company. Prosecutors charge Ana Garcia with communications fraud today.
Mexicanos deportados en Estados Unidos quedaron plasmados en un puente internacional en el Paso del Norte en Ciudad Juárez.
Ana Garcia currently lives in the Mexican state of Jalisco.
¿Qué le dirías a una persona que piensa que la deportación es el fin?
El fin de la discriminación, el fin del miedo.
Esta es una historia que solo verá aquí.
Zuli, este es precisamente el caso de esta joven, una mujer que vivió por años aquí en los Estados Unidos y terminó con sus 5 hijos, ciudadanos de este país, en México, un país al que dice ella no conocía.
Y se está convirtiendo en el... Me toca el corazón porque Ani se está convirtiendo en el sueño mexicano, el sueño de muchas personas de salir adelante en su propio país.
I'm Annie JRC. I was deported from the US in 2018. I have 2 similar playlists. I have a playlist where I showcase inspiring deportation stories that I have been able to come across, people that have been deported, have shared their stories, and have rebuilt successfully in our home country. I've also created the second series with deportation stories that I'm exposing, that I'm shining light on, as stories that have been exploiting the community and that have been presented through false pretenses to monetize by concealing the real deportation story behind these individuals. Let's get into it. So first, I like to start out these episodes with what these content creators originally told us when they were growing their platforms. Specifically for Candace, she began creating content in 2020. And in this since deleted video on her page, I screen recorded this video in 2023. As of the posting of this video, it was not there when I checked this morning. Here's a screenshot of her YouTube channel when I went looking for this video. It's no longer there. She created a series of story times on her YouTube channel, part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where she talked about why her husband was deported.
Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is part 4 of commonly asked questions. So today I wanted to talk about why my husband was deported. I get this question a lot, like all these other questions, but I think that this is an important story. So the short answer to this is that my husband was deported because he had entered the States illegally. He went to the States at the age of 17 because he was in search of a better life. His family was very poor. He had dropped out of school in 3rd grade so that he could help provide for his family, help his dad. And so he did what I think a lot of people do, is that he went to the United States seeking something better. He wanted to make something better for his parents after all of their sacrifices. But I think what's most important about this, and what's most important about this is the day that he was detained. So my husband was working for a company And for those of you that don't know, we're originally from Utah. He was working for a company in Utah, and they were in a company vehicle. They had just finished one job site, and they were getting the tools from that job site to move to the new job site. He was not driving the vehicle. There were a couple different guys in that car or in that truck. And when they pulled out of the property, they were pulled over by an officer, and the officer told them that he needed to make sure that they weren't stealing the tools. Mind you, they were in company shirts, company vehicle. So, yeah. I know what everybody is, at least I'm thinking. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking. So they ended up running everybody's name in the vehicle. And when they ran my husband's, it did show that he, wasn't legally present in the States. And so that's when he was picked up. The whole process was a little over a year. He was moved around to a bunch of different facilities. We did have to do visits in a detention center. We even at one point drove to Texas in one day just so that we could visit my husband, because that facility that he was in right before he was deported allowed us to actually physically touch him, which meant that we got to hug him, and we hadn't gotten to do that for almost a year at that point. So a lot of different things went on during that time. Some of them I am choosing not to disclose. Because some of those things are very personal. And if you know me from my other platforms and things like that, and I hope that you're getting to know me from YouTube, you know that while I'm very open to answering a variety of different questions, there are things that I do keep private for my family's safety and just because they're private, intimate details. So if you have any questions, please comment below and let me know what your question is, what you'd like me to answer on a video, and make sure that you're following me on TikTok.
In her YouTube video that's titled "Why My Husband Was Deported," she narrates a story where she pretty much says he was deported because he entered unlawfully without documents. Now, that's pretty much the case for a lot of us. We could get away with saying, yes, we were deported because we didn't have documents or lack them. In addition to this video and several story times that she had created on her channel in her early journey, she talked about the fact that he was removed from the United States for simply entering at the age of 17 without documentation. And she specifically made several statements stating he had no criminal history. This is a screenshot that I took from a viewer in 2023 that had responded to one of her comments. And I'll eventually go into the history of why this surfaced in 2023 very briefly. You guys know that Candace and I have history. We've been involved in a years-long feud that I'm not going to go into the details of that because I've made several videos on it. But I'm going to briefly mention it in this episode to give some context to some of the declarations that she made and why she eventually came out with additional narratives. Okay. So her story that she has presented to social media, to several news networks, was that her husband was simply deported for lacking documentation. In some of her early interviews, she narrates that he was simply stopped on his way to work, wrong place, wrong time. He was apprehended for not having ID. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that all of the information that I'm going to be sharing in this video has been obtained from public records, public news articles that she has given, and her own content and admissions. Some of these videos have since been deleted, but I have compiled all of the history to give us a narration of this entire story. Starting with when they met. Candace, before she was Candace Garcia, was Candace Smith. She lived in Salt Lake City, Utah, as did Fidel. He entered without documents, per her narration, at the age of 17, and they both lived a life in Utah. They met in 2007 when Candace was 18 years old and Fidel was 26. As she narrates in this article, an interview that she gave La Opinión, which is currently still linked in her link tree. So she narrates that she was freshly 18 years old and he was 26, and she's consistently shared, their love story that they met when they were very young, and they've been together ever since. Keep that in mind as I go down the court filings. Okay, so they meet in 2007, they start dating, and their first child is born in 2009. She states in this article that she always knew that he was undocumented. FYI, I did make cliff notes of this so if you see me referencing this page, it's because I made a chronological list of all the events that transpired through court recordings or through court filings. I will be showing court records and receipts as we go along, but if you see me reference this paper, it's because I've made a list of all the chronological events. So he enters the U.S. at 17 without documents, they meet, they start dating, and they have their first child in 2009. Now, contrary to what Candace shared with several news stations with her viewers, Fidel actually did have a criminal history, and it was a lengthy criminal history. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind that if you go back to any of her interviews, she begins telling their story from 2016 forward. She narrates that he was apprehended by ICE in May of 2006, and that's when their nightmare began. Verbatim, that's what she's told many news networks. What actually happened is their story begins in 2008. His criminal history begins in 2008. So mind you, they begin dating in 2007. In 2008, he's charged with a felony DUI, possession of paraphernalia, in an open container. The offense date was in May 2008. And he took a plea deal in July of 2008. He's placed on felony probation. It's worth noting, he did have several run-ins with that case where he struggled to stay compliant with the terms of his probation. His second offense was in November of 2011, where he pled guilty to assault, causing bodily injury, and domestic violence in the presence of a child. This is a case centered around Candace and their firstborn child as the victim. He is arrested in November of 2011 based off of this offense, and he is jailed until he pleads guilty in February of 2012. He is then promptly deported in March 8th of 2012. This is his first deportation from the United States, and I want to give you some context. He committed violent felonies, from the felony DUI to the felony assault and domestic violence in presence of a child. Under immigration law, because these are violent offenses, he was removed as an aggravated felon. What this means is that he was removed with either a lifetime bar or up to 20 years. I have not seen the records for his deportation case that specify, but as somebody that was also deported as an aggravated felon, I received a lifetime bar, and typically with violent offenses, we all receive lifetime bars. So he is removed from the U.S. on March 8th, 2012. In April of 2012, although he was deported, a warrant for his arrest is issued in his felony DUI case. This isn't uncommon. It happened to me. In the event he ever returns to the U.S., he's going to be brought to the court so that he can complete the remainder of his sentence. Now, a very interesting fact here. In April of 2012, Candace filed for divorce from her first spouse, Brian Allen Ferguson. I have confirmed that this divorce does belong to her. The address listed in this divorce matches a speeding ticket with her address around the same time, linked to her date of birth. So Candace was actually previously married to somebody else, and I have to admit I was shocked when I found this information, because when did she have time to get married if she met him at 18? And these are just my assumptions. But if she was already married, I can only assume she didn't marry him after she met Fidel, because they seem to be in a serious relationship where they even birthed their first child. So my assumption is that she was married to Mr. Ferguson prior to meeting Fidel. And in Utah, in Mormon culture, in Utah culture in general, it's very common for people to get married at 18. I myself was married at the age of 18. So my assumption is, as soon as she turned 18, she married Mr. Brian. I can only assume that there were marital issues. She met Fidel, and something happened, and she officially files for divorce from Mr. Brian in April of 2012. Now, I do think it's important to mention that it's highly likely based on the dates that she was married to this person when she birthed her first son in 2009. In the state of Utah, when you are legally married and a child is born, your spouse is presumed to be the legal father of that child, unless there's a paternity action, which in this case there are none. Her divorce in 2012 does not list any children within the marriage, but I just thought it was important to put that out there because as a viewer, I was really shocked. This is something she's obviously never shared. It's part of her private life, but it's also part of public records. And I do think the timing is interesting that she filed for divorce April 4th of 2012, shortly after his deportation to the U.S., or his first deportation to Mexico. Now, in July of 2014, a progress report is filed into his DUI case. Mind you, he's been deported and removed, so obviously we don't expect him to be in compliance with his probation. But in that progress report, he is declared a fugitive from the law. Now, we know he's deported, so technically he's not fugitive, and this is very common that the state courts don't communicate with immigration courts. But the reason why I point that out is because now we're going to jump forward to May 2016, and this is when Candace starts telling her story. All of her stories and interviews have always began in May of 2016, where he was randomly stopped, and because he didn't have documentation, he was apprehended. What actually happened is, at the time that he was stopped, he had felony warrants for his arrest, and he was a fugitive from the law. And I think that makes a great difference in when we're telling these stories, particularly because, especially prior to this current administration, this story planted fear in a lot of viewers that this is somebody that was just on their way to work, picked up without documents, and deported. And it sets a false precedent because this was actually a violent offender that had already been removed from the United States, had felony warrants, and was declared a fugitive of the law when he was stopped by the police. Contrary to what Candace has narrated for years, he was not detained for lack of documentation. He was not detained for being at the wrong place at the right time or anything like that. He was detained because he was a wanted fugitive that had already been removed by the U.S. government. And he had been removed by the U.S. government because he had committed violent crimes against her child, and he had also committed crimes that posed a threat to public safety. So I do want to mention, I couldn't find this receipt anywhere, but I used to be one of her viewers in the early part of her journey. And there was one time where she made a video where she was talking about politics and how she felt that the U.S. government had turned their back on her family. And at the time, I resonated with that because I just imagined like, wow, this poor family, victim of the immigration system. But what actually happened is the U.S. government was proactively trying to protect her from her abuser and went as far as to remove him from the country. And this starts to paint a very different picture because the story has been glorified to the max by news outlets, the media, and her own social media content. We're at May 2016, and again, this is where Candace has always started her story. But in fact, there was an entire history before May 2016 where this person, her spouse, had already been removed from the United States once. He was a violent offender, and he was a wanted felon, which changes the trajectory of the story as we're narrating. My husband was just picked up. He's a hard worker on his way to work. See what I'm saying? Okay, so in May of 2016, because this individual re-entered the U.S. unlawfully after he had already been removed as an aggravated felon, I want to give you guys some context. When the U.S. government removes us, especially as aggravated felons, we are viewed as a threat to public safety. Regardless of the stories behind our charges, regardless of the humanity, regardless of the humans that we are, the U.S. government views us as threats to safety, threats to the safety of the people inside the United States. So when he re-entered unlawfully and he was picked up in May of 2016, the U.S. government formally charged him with unlawful re-entry as a previously removed alien. These are now federal charges. This is not state court. This is not just a felony case. These are federal charges for re-entry. This is a very serious offense. Now during this time is when Candace married him. She has shared openly on several videos of her channel that she married him while he was detained. Obviously, the motivation behind that, we can all agree, was to try to prevent him from being deported again. The outcome of that case is he was formally sentenced to 1 year in federal prison for re-entering unlawfully as a previously removed alien. I don't love the term alien. I'm just reading what the court documents state. I do think it's worth noting that during the duration of that case, before he took the plea deal, because it was obvious that he was guilty, Candace and her family wrote multiple letters of support for him, as they should, as anybody would, trying to prevent their loved one from being deported, right? And in these letters, multiple of her family members stated that he was a great dad, a hard worker, a provider, all of the things that we would expect supportive family members to say about somebody facing deportation proceedings. Unfortunately, he was remanded to serve his prison sentence of a full year and eventually deported again in August of 2017. He now has a lifetime bar. This means he can never re-enter, he can never fix. There is nothing that wipes out an unlawful re-entry. And I think this part is also important to accentuate, because in Candace's content, she has always mentioned, when people ask her, would you ever go back to the US? And her answer has always been, no, we're very happy here. We're, A, B, C, and D. I know that because I've been a viewer of hers, when the correct answer should be, we can never return with him. He can never return because he has a lifetime bar because of his extensive criminal and immigration history. That also changes the narrative as we try to romanticize these stories of life in Mexico, that yes, we're here because we were forced to come back. Some of us choose to stay. Some of us move to different parts. Some of us go back unlawfully because we are unable to adapt. But in this particular story, there is no possibility of immigration relief because he is a violent offender and he re-entered unlawfully, served a prison sentence, was formally charged. So there is no avenue for this family, for her spouse, to ever return to the US. So when she says, no, we wouldn't return, the correct answer should be, we cannot return with him. And so because of that, she chooses to stay in Mexico to keep her family together, which is admirable. Candace began creating content in June of 2020. And her story, up until 2023, contained he was removed from the US for just not having documents, which we now know she left out a lot of history. And she misrepresented this story initially to her viewers. And some of you may be on here and say, well, she already told us about his history. She made a YouTube video about it. I want to give you context with that YouTube video. In May of 2023, Candace and I and several other content creators were involved in a TikTok feud that I've already narrated and detailed. You guys know that Candace and I have history. There is animosity and a lot of years long worth of drama that began in 2023. In 2023, when I was battling multiple content creators that were attacking my platforms, harassing, all sorts of things that, again, I'm not going to focus on in this video. I've made multiple other videos narrating her involvement, how she partook in it. And even in present day, you guys have seen some updates to things that she has done behind the scenes, the way she's reached out to other creators, etc. Right? So there is a history there that began in 2023. In May of 2023, I'm going to tell you guys how I came across all this information. This is not something that I actively searched for. It literally fell into my lap and I felt obligated to share it. At the time, I was a new creator as well. I started creating content in 2021, and Candace's story and I have become kind of the widely known life in Mexico, life after deportation. And there's a lot of other creators in present day, but back then it was mainly her and I. Okay, so in 2023, in the middle of this feud, because there was viewers watching, I received a DM on TikTok from somebody that had searched up her husband and found his mugshot online. This was how I found out that he had a criminal record, and it's how I found out everything that I've just shared. At first, I didn't believe it, and I'm going to show you the conversation here, but she pretty much reached out to me and said, hey, and I do think it's interesting that this viewer is also from Utah. So I don't know if that had something to do with it. I don't know if maybe she knew her, but she reached out to me because she knew that we were in the middle of some TikTok drama. And she just said, just to share, there's public information about her husband, including a lengthy arrest record of domestic violence in the presence of a child. She never includes all of his arrests in their story. I was instantly intrigued. I said, well, where did you get this info? She said, mugshots.com. I didn't know his last name, but he came right up. She did a birthday video for him. So I confirmed his birthday that way. To be honest, you and her story always intrigued me because I'm from Utah and my husband is an immigrant. It never made sense to me, her husband's story and why he got deported. So I decided to look up mugshots and it came right up. So this was where I received information about his background. And I did ask, do you have the link? And it intrigued me. I found his mugshots. I found some of his records. Now, unfortunately for Candace, I also grew up in the state of Utah and I had lengthy knowledge of the court system. So I actually did a record search from him in the actual database for the state of Utah. And I found everything that I've shared, from their domestic violence, the DUI. I also found a robbery charge, but cannot confirm it belongs to him because it's missing a birth date. And I honestly didn't care to file the FOIA request to get it back in time for this video. I think with the information that I have is enough. But I only mentioned that because I know I've mentioned it on recent lives about the robbery charge. So I just want to say that I did find a robbery charge, an aggravated robbery charge for an individual with the same name from the same area, but it was missing a date of birth. So because I can't confirm that it belongs to him, I didn't include it in this video. But for those of you that may want to research, have at it. So anyway, so now we have the full story, right? Now we have the lengthy criminal record. We know that there's domestic violence. We know that there's just a lot of questionable things in this story that have been kept out of the narration through social media content, through the news interviews. Now, I want to give you guys some context and why her story is so important to me in this series. Candace's channel and her brand, I want to start with the name of her brand because I do think white privilege has a lot to do with this story. Oh wait, before we get to there. So in 2023, I uncovered all of this information. And on March 16 of 2023, I made a video exposing his background. If you want to know why, you're going to have to watch the hate campaign videos, but I just don't think it's relevant. So she made a comment and labeled me publicly on her platform as dangerous. I was triggered by that. I had this information and I said, that's awfully diabolical from somebody that is sleeping next to somebody that is actually dangerous and poses more of a threat than I could ever through social media content. So on March 16, 2023, I made the first video exposing his deportation story. A few days later, around March 23rd of 2023, she makes a TikTok video directing people to her monetized YouTube channel of, hey, somebody just recently told our story incorrectly and we want to tell you our side of the story. Now pause right there. Pause right there, because the intro to this was no accountability. That wasn't her story to tell. And I received a lot of hate in 2023 for exposing these details, that it wasn't my business. I shouldn't have said this. I shouldn't have said that. And people were more mad at me for even bringing it to light than the fact that she lied. In her YouTube video that a million people have now watched, and it's still currently up on her YouTube channel, her and Fidel get up in front of the camera and she begins to narrate some of their history. She starts out her video by apologizing for lying, admitting that she lied, and goes right into narrating some of these details. I want you guys to pay attention to the way this video was recorded, with her at the front and him in the back. He says maybe a handful of words the entire video, and she narrates their story and what happened, doesn't go into details, and like a true victim of domestic violence, she justifies what happened, says it was also my fault, the state of Utah picked up the case, I didn't want to charge. But I do want to specify, because of those justifications that were made, for the state of Utah to charge him, that means that the state of Utah determined that he was the aggressor. And I want to bring you back to what the charges were: assault, causing bodily injury, and domestic violence in the presence of a child. In her video, she justifies that it was both of our faults. I had something to do with it. Our son wasn't even in the same room. He was just in the same house. So the state of Utah forced me to charge him, although I didn't want to, etc. These are typical statements that a victim of domestic violence would make. Fidel never spoke up. He never took any accountability. What she did was she shielded him with her image, with her words, with her explanation from ever having to take any accountability for any of those charges. She goes on to narrate, if we've received donations and if you feel like you've been misled, feel free to send me a request for a refund, because at the time she had her Venmo and Cash App and was receiving donations to build their home that they're currently still working on, right? So she acknowledges in that video that she created a story and she lied to the public, and she received monetary gain off of that story. She received a platform, she received donations, she was featured on multiple news outlets off of that false story. Now, a lot of people, some viewers were upset. Some of them forgave her quickly and just chalked it up to Annie's just drama and all this drama that you've been dragged into and your poor family, and people can change. And I'll be the first to tell you that people are capable of change and redemption, but not without accountability first. If there's no accountability, then how can we say that there's been redemption, that there's been change, that this person is a rehabilitated offender, especially when it comes to domestic violence? How many stories of domestic violence have we actually seen with a happily ever after where the abuser changes? Very few. As somebody that is also a victim of domestic violence, I can just say that I would have looked at this story completely different. I want to give you guys an exercise. I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to pretend that instead of Candace Smith being the author of the story, I want you to picture Maria Sanchez. She's short, she has dark hair, she has brown skin, she has an accent, and she too is an American citizen that has moved to Mexico to stay with her husband despite the history of domestic violence. Would we still clap for her? Would we still be idolizing her? Would we still see this as a love story across borders? Would Maria have been featured all over hundreds of news stations? I think we all know the answer to that is no. Because in current day, I've seen a lot of platforms of Latina content creators who have the same storyline that have not blown up the way that Candace has. Now, one thing that I've always found very interesting is the amount of news reporters that ran this story without vetting it, without even looking into his criminal history, if one existed or not. Now, you may think, why is that relevant? Why does it matter? As somebody that has since been featured on multiple news outlets for the same topic of deportation, I can tell you that there's many reporters who have ran my background. So why wasn't Candace's story ever vetted? Why did we take her word for it that this was a victim of the immigration system, that her spouse was picked up for being at the wrong place at the wrong time? I can tell you my personal opinion is because her story is told through white privilege. And her story is shielded. The real deportation story of this individual who has violent offenses is shielded by her sweet little white lady image. It's shielded the same way that she explained his real deportation story, sitting in the front with him in the back, and she's telling you the story and she's justifying everything that happened. That is the justification for him. That is why there's no accountability ever demanded from the public for his crimes, for his role in the deportation. Because this sweet, cute güerita, now I even want to take you down to the branding of her platforms. La güerita translates into little blondie, little white girl. Present day, Candace Garcia Sanchez, formerly known as Candace Smith, has become the face of deportation stories on social media. She has been featured on multiple articles representing the struggle of deportation. And I won't take away that spouses such as herself carry a lot of trauma, pain, and struggle of their own. But for a white American citizen to be given the privilege to represent the struggle of deportation despite having lied, despite concealing the real story, despite creating a false storyline for their own monetary benefit. Why have we allowed that? And that's why I think her story is so important, because her story actually set the precedent for many of these other stories that you will see on this series. Her story made people comfortable with lying about their stories because she was quickly forgiven. And I want you to ask yourself, if somebody with my history, if a Latina woman had got on here and lied about violent offenses, would we as quickly forgive her for lying to us about her real deportation story the way that Candace was quickly forgiven? Would we continue to support platforms that we know co-sign domestic violence and justify it? Would we continue to glorify this as a love story of this woman that crossed borders to keep her family together? Or would we see a codependent victim of domestic violence being exploited by a much older male? Would we see a sweet little family just doing family content, or would we see the real story for what it is? Would we see the white privilege that is not declining even in Mexico? I think it's important to note that her husband, who is the actual deportee, has never shared his story. He has never spoken about his story. He has never shared his experience, whether it was his experience in detention or his, that is the deportation story in this case. And he has never shared it. It has always been shared through her image, through her narration, through her content. She has appropriated his story for their monetary gain through lies, through deceiving the public. So for those of you that may come on and have watched to this far and say, well, she told us about it, she was honest. She was forced to come clean because I exposed her in March of 2023. So that video on her YouTube channel was created in response to mine. She would have never came forward if she wasn't forced to. She would have continued. And sometimes I have a hard time believing, understanding what made you think that this would not come out at some point. What made you so confident to boldly say, my husband has no criminal record, knowing full well that he had a lengthy violent record? And perhaps we can attribute it to they just never thought they were going to get this big. But what gave you the confidence to be on national news outlets and tell a story full of lies? What gave you the confidence to get on here and say, sorry, I lied? And I can tell you what it is. It is the white privilege of knowing that she will be forgiven. All is well, all will be forgotten, and I will continue to be able to do what I do. I will continue to be able to represent this niche. Now, I'm not going to go into the further, drama, but so in closing and summary, I do think it's important to shine a light on the fact that we as a community, predominantly Latinos, have placed this individual, have given her the privilege in our own country to represent our struggle, despite the fact she has never lived it, despite the fact she is shielding an abuser from any accountability, and despite the fact that she has admitted lying to us. Now, again, I want you to do that exercise again. If her name was not Candace Smith and it was Maria Sanchez, would we clap for this story the way that we do? Would we idolize her? Would we give her praise for keeping her family together and birthing additional children with the man that abused her and her child? Would we, and I can tell you one thing, I personally in 2023 received a lot of hate for getting back with the father of my children who had a hand in my deportation. So much hate that it actually kickstarted the hate campaign that she formed part of. I also was a victim of domestic violence due to my choice of getting back with the father of my kids. And I just remember the contrast feeling of constantly being, kicked and judged for taking him back. But when I look at a story like Candace, she's frequently applauded for keeping her family together. But at what cost as a woman? How do we so quickly shove domestic violence to the side and continue to idolize this love story across borders? It is a love story, but deeply rooted with a turbulent past of domestic violence, codependency, infidelities, previous marriage. I mean, all of that changes, right? All of that changes this perspective, this story we've been sold that has been romanticized to their benefit. And I think these stories are important to shine light on, because what are we co-signing as women when we idolize these stories? What other story do you know that begins with domestic violence and ends in a happily ever after? Personally, I know none.